So for more on the tariff war, let's speak now with Professor Peter Draper. He's Executive Director at the Institute for International Trade at the University of Adelaide. Good morning, Professor. I want to start with India. We don't know the full impact of higher tariffs, for weeks, perhaps months. But what we have been hearing over the past 20 hours or so is, from many analysts, including Morgan Stanley and UBS, is that the Indian economy is consumption-based, so the hit to GDP growth is going to be limited. Is that your assessment as well?
Thanks, Arnold, and good morning. Yes, I think that's a fair assessment. The Indian economy was built up over decades on the basis of import substitution. So there is a very big domestic market. It doesn't rely as extensively on exports as, say, China or other Southeast Asian economies like Vietnam or Indonesia or Malaysia that have been also hit by Mr. Trump's reciprocal duties. But they're going to take a series of hits in labour-intensive sectors, and I think that will create some pain for sure. And what we don't know yet is whether their major export, which is generic pharmaceuticals, whether that will be subject to a very high sectoral duty. So that's under investigation by the United States at the moment, and there may well be semiconductor tariffs and other sector-specific tariffs. So the pain, I guess, could widen.
Professor Draper, we know that India is trying to, reduce the impact. The Prime Minister himself rolling out a make and spend in India campaign. There are also tax breaks. We know he's trying to simplify its GST as well, the architecture. So less taxes, pretty straightforward, more money to spend. But is India's manufacturing sector up to the task? Because we know manufacturing has stayed at about 15% of GDP for years, despite subsidies and incentives?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think a lot of India's problems in the manufacturing sector are not so much the availability of cheap and productive labour, but they have more to do with a plethora of domestic regulations, whether that's the labour market or the tax issues that you cite, or interstate border barriers and regulations. There's just a whole range of them. So Mr. Modi's been trying to reform these since he came into office, but he's facing a whole series of domestic political economy constraints. And of course, he's facing some very key state elections coming up as well. And this just makes this impasse with the United States even more sensitive, potentially hopefully not unresolvable, but certainly more difficult to resolve.
Professor, just looking specifically at the tariffs, do you think the 50% levies on India are here to stay? And if not, under what conditions might Washington ease or lift them? Or in the end, does this really come down to which side blinks first?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think you'd really have to ask Mr. Trump that question, and who knows what's in Mr. Trump's mind on any given day of the week. But the extra 25% tariff that India or Indian exporters to some extent will pay, because of course American importers will share the cost of that tariff, and let's be clear about that. I think it's in part a negotiating tactic on the part of the Trump administration. This is Mr. Trump's playbook. He raises the stakes, he plays hardball, and he's done that with a range of countries, and India is just the latest manifestation of that. He's claimed that this extra tariff is imposed for geopolitical reasons, to put pressure on Russia in the context of the very difficult Russia-Ukraine peace talks that he is brokering, and maybe that plays a role as well. But then why hasn't he tariffed China, for instance? China has more cards, perhaps. There's a range of considerations. So at the end of the day, and then maybe one other fact we should consider is that from some of the press reporting, it seems that the personal relationship between Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump has, if not broken down, is certainly under strain, and particularly over the recent India-Pakistan conflict, in which Mr. Trump intervened, it would seem, and claimed credit for brokering a truce. And that put further domestic political pressure on Mr. Modi, who was then portrayed as being weak. So I think you've got a range of intractable issues in play here, but at the heart of it, I think, is Mr. Trump's negotiating style, and ultimately it's his decision as to how he wants to proceed.
Sure, Professor. I mean, speaking of China, with Mr. Modi making his first visit to Beijing in 7 years, and the SCO summit just days away, bringing President Xi, Putin, and Modi together, how might this dynamic affect Trump's negotiations with Beijing? Could it shift the balance in China's favor?
In China's favor, I'm not so sure. I think the India-China relationship really has a baked-in structural geopolitical reality, which the Americans know extremely well. Of course, how much of Mr. Trump's national security and India-specific national advisory teams remain intact is an open question. A lot of people are wondering about that. So does he have good knowledge on Indian dynamics is a key question, and I suspect the answer to that question is no. But at the end of the day, it's in both China and India's interest to be seen, to be getting closer. Mm-hmm. But the ongoing geopolitical tensions between them, I think, supersede any superficial closeness. And of course, if Mr. Trump relents and removes the 25% tariff, then I think that dynamic will quite quickly shift.
Right, Professor, the other big trade event, if you like, this week is the end of the de minimis exemption. Happens tomorrow for all countries. I don't want to downplay this, but I'm trying to understand if this is really going to be that significant, because we know the total value last year was 65 billion, compared to total imports into the United States at 3.5 billion, and only 40% of that will be borne by Asia, Europe, and other countries. So what kind of an impact do you think this is going to have on Asian businesses, if at all?
I think it will impact on e-commerce businesses particularly, and especially the Chinese e-commerce exporters, but they're not the only ones. And as I understand, and I haven't followed this particular issue very closely, but the threshold has been lowered to $100. So the more creative companies simply ship smaller, lower value parcels and many more of them to get under the threshold. So in a sense, the market always finds a way around the problem, but it makes exports from countries like Australia. So Australian Post has suspended, it's one of those 27 countries that has suspended its parcel shipments to the United States. So for us, it's just not a worthwhile proposition. But if you're a Chinese exporter with your huge economies of scale and very cheap costs and highly efficient logistics, I think they'll find workarounds.
All right, Professor, we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts this morning. Professor Peter Draper is Executive Director at the Institute for International Trade at the University of Adelaide.